Okay, guys, hello. Welcome to SEDA College Online, uh, and welcome to the first in the new intermediate lesson series. Um, I'm broadcasting today from beautiful Dublin, Ireland. Uh, and take a moment, get things set up, get your computers working. Uh, Please feel free to say in the chat, say where you're from, uh, what the weather's like for you today here. It's a somewhat warm day. Maybe I think it's about 10 degrees or so. So not too bad for Dublin. What about for you? What's the weather like where you're from or where you are at the moment? So I thought I would begin just before we begin the lesson, just so you could learn a little bit about myself. Uh, my name is Austin, and I'm from Thomasville, Georgia, so I'm from the United States. My hometown is very, very, very small. If you can see here on the map, it's where this red pin is. So it's in the very south portion of the country. So it's very hot, very humid. Um, it's an area of the country used for agriculture, really. So most everyone in my hometown has something to do with farming of some kind. Um, and so my hobbies, let's see, my two favorite hobbies at the moment are baking bread and playing video games. I've found it's really fun to try to make different kinds of bread. It's a good way to feel productive while also saving money. It's somewhat kind of cheap to bake bread. Uh, all right, so let's go ahead and begin the lesson for today. So I'll start with an overview. I want to tell you what we will talk about and everything that we're going to cover in today's session. So for the grammar today, we're going to talk about the present simple and the present continuous. And I really want to focus today on comparing the two because it can be somewhat tricky to know when English uses one and when English uses the other. And then the next big point for today is making questions. This can be very complicated in English, so we're going to look at how to know what is the correct form for each different type of question. And then we're going to move to vocabulary today and cover food vocabulary. We chose food today because this is a subject where the present simple and the present continuous is used a lot. Okay, so let's start with the present simple. So what is it? Well, I always talk about grammar in three ways. I'm going to talk about meaning, the form of the grammar, and if there's anything for pronunciation that we need to talk about. So let's talk about meaning first. So the present simple has two major meanings in English. Uh, One is to talk about facts. So this is going to be kind of the most basic use of the present simple, things that are always true. And then the next way that we tend to use it is to talk about habits and routines or things that happen regularly. So, those sorts of things like what you do every day, what you eat every day, where you go every day, those are going to be the present simple. So how do I make it? What's the kind of grammar structure? Um, it's probably the simplest grammar structure in English. It's going to be subject, verb, and it's going to be the base form of the verb. So I say base form. Some teachers may use the word infinitive here, and that's totally okay. I prefer to use base form because the infinitive requires the preposition to. So you might hear to do, to go, to jump. Those are going to be infinitives. When I say base form, I mean the verb without to. So just, go, do, jump, no to. So that's what I mean by subject, verb, base form. And always remember that little annoying thing in the present simple. We have a third person marker. It is the suffix s. So if your subject is a he, if your subject is a she, or your subject is an it, the verb will have an s ending. So let's look at some examples for that. So it rains a lot in Dublin. That's a very common time we're going to use the present simple. Going back to number one, talking about facts. It's just true. It rains a lot in Dublin. Or let's look at some examples for habits and routines. So I eat breakfast every day. For me, I must. I have to. I have to eat breakfast every day. Otherwise, I cannot handle the day. Um, and then maybe you want to describe your work. I work as a teacher. So if we look at example number 3 here, let's change it for he. So it might be I work as a teacher or he works as a teacher. There we have that third person S from below coming back. So then, let's compare that to the present continuous. I'll do the same thing, meaning, form, pronunciation, or notes. So, meaning. The present continuous has a very specific meaning in English. We use it to talk about actions that are happening right now. And these actions are normally temporary. They are not habits, they are not routines, they are just situations happening around us at this moment. So this is one area where English is somewhat different than other languages. It is very common for other languages to use the present simple to talk about things happening now. This is not true in English. The present simple is only for those two things, habits and for truths and facts. Anything else, anything describing your current environment is going to be the present continuous. So how do I make it? Well, we always start with the subject, and then we move to the be verb as an auxiliary. So yeah, we've now got multiple parts to one verb here. So we'll have be verb, and then the actual main verb will have an ing suffix. I'm sure you're somewhat familiar with this. So let's look quickly and review the forms of the be verb here. It will be, if your subject is I, it will be am, he, she, it will be is, and we, they is going to be are. So here are some examples to see. I am talking about English. Right now, with you guys, I'm talking about English. You guys are studying right now. So in this moment, you're looking at my slides, you're listening to me, you're studying. And then we are using SEDA online for class today. So you can see here that all of these situations are describing your current environment right now. I can make more examples right now. I am sitting in a chair. I am wearing a green SEDA hoodie. I am drinking a cup of coffee. All of these are going to be present continuous because they're describing what's going on right now in my environment, in my life. And for the present continuous, we have a pronunciation note. I'm sure it'll be your favorite thing. Contractions. Hey, contractions. Uh, so always remember in the present continuous, you're going to have different contractions, especially with that auxiliary be verb. So we have positive contractions. I'm, your, he's, she's, it's, we're, there. And then if the sentence is negative, we'll have negative contractions, aren't and isn't. So let's take a moment and practice these contractions and do some pronunciation. So I want you to repeat after me. I will say each contraction and pause to give you a moment to say back to me. So I'm, your, he's, she's, it's, we're, and there. All right, very good. So let's do the negative contractions. So aren't, isn't. Very good. So remember that these contractions will almost always be used in spoken pronunciation. We will never say, I am, you are, he is, unless we're putting some kind of special emphasis on the verb there. I always say for contractions that they're kind of they're important for one main reason. English speakers will say them to you. So you personally, if you use them or you do not use them, that's your choice as a speaker. If you want to use them, that's great. It will make you sound more like an American or a British speaker. But if you don't use them, that's okay. Everyone will understand. But what is important is that you will hear them. 100% you're going to hear them. So be aware of them. And if you want to use them, please give it a try. So let's look at these in a sentence. So I'll take one from the previous slide. I'm talking about English. It's not going to be I am talking about English. It'll always be I'm talking about English. Um, and these also work in situations where we wouldn't write them. So I've put a star on this example because this is something that I don't recommend to write. This is something only for pronunciation. But we will even put these on other subjects that are not I, you, he, we, they. We'll make contractions with almost any subject we can. So something like David's eating lunch right now is going to be much more common than David is eating lunch right now. Or it might be a plural subject. The children are making a lot of noise today. You will very rarely hear an English speaker say the children are making a lot of noise today. They'll always say the children are making a lot of noise today. That's my maximum speed pronunciation. So just be aware to try to listen for these. Begin to train your ear that these are going to be what you hear. Um, and then we come to the final big grammar point for today, making questions. I'm very happy with this. To do or not to do, that is the question. I'm sure you how always are going, when do I add this do verb? When do I not? What do I do? So I want to try and help you here with some rules for making questions with English sentences. If you want the formal grammar word, the grammar word for this is called subject auxiliary inversion. So this is what linguists use to describe the process of an English sentence making a question. And so the word inversion means reverse. And that's all English is doing. We're changing the position of the auxiliary verb and the subject of the sentence. So one thing we need to talk about then, what's an auxiliary verb? What is a main verb? So English verbs have multiple parts. I'm sure you know this. You have seen verbs that have 2 or 3 parts to make the complete idea. And so we break these parts into groups. One is called a main verb. This is the verb that has the meaning. This is the verb that has the idea of the sentence. So if I say, I am teaching English, well, we know that there are 2 parts to this verb, am teaching. But so which one's the main verb? Well, that's going to be teaching, because that is the verb with the meaning of this sentence. But it's not alone. It needs something to help it. It needs something to help communicate the person and the continuous idea. And so that's the auxiliary verb, am. So you can also call these, sometimes you might see these called helper verbs or helping verbs. That's a very common way to describe them as well. So they will always come to the left, I have to reverse, to the left of the main verb. And so that's one way you can help identify. As well, the auxiliary verb will always change for person, usually. So that's another way you can look and how to identify them. English really only has 3 or 4 auxiliary verbs depending on how you count. Verb to be, verb to have, and verb to do, and then other modal verbs like will, may, might, can. Those are also, they behave like auxiliary verbs. So it's not too much to keep in your head that there are only really 4 kinds. So why are auxiliary verbs so important? Because auxiliary verbs are what will make the question with. So here are the 2 fundamental rules for English questions. These rules will almost never let you down. To make an English question, move the auxiliary verb to the front of the sentence. That's it. That's all you do. You take the auxiliary verb and you put it at the other end, the front of the sentence. Now, what do you do if you don't have an auxiliary verb? Verb to do. This is where do becomes part of the equation. If there isn't an auxiliary verb, English says, well, I have to have something. I must move something to the front of the sentence. But there's nothing there. What do I do? Well, English adds another verb. We add verb to do to fix that problem, to fix the gap. So let's look at this in a little more detail. So I'm going to show you some questions, and I want you to guess what the correct, or some sentences, and then I want you to guess the question, rather. So I've shown the rules here so we can remember. Let's look at this. David is making lunch. How do I turn that into a question? Take a moment to think. If you said, is David making lunch? You're correct. So we've just moved verb to be, is, to the front of the sentence. Here's another. Sarah walks to work. What do you think the question is? If you said, does Sarah walk to work? Exactly correct. So let's look at these parts in detail. So in the first sentence, David is making lunch. We had all 3 parts. We have a subject, an auxiliary, and a main verb. We have auxiliary verb to be and making as your main verb. So nothing to change, nothing to do. Subject, auxiliary, inversion. We swap them. Is David making lunch? Easy. But if we look at the next example, no auxiliary. Present simple sentence. Sarah walks to work. What do I do? Well, English says I got to move something. I need it. I need to move something. So we add verb to do to the front of the sentence. In this case, it's a third person singular, Sarah. So it becomes does, not do. So do remember we have 2 forms for auxiliary verb, do and does. So always remember this is how English really works with questions. If you have an auxiliary verb, move it. If you don't have an auxiliary verb, you will need to add do. So really what this means is that the present simple for questions, you need do. Hands down, because the present simple has no additional forms. But the present continuous, do I need do? No. We have auxiliary verb to be in the present continuous, so we'll never need to add do here. If you have an auxiliary in a sentence, if you have auxiliary be, you will never add auxiliary do because they fight. They try to do the same thing in the sentence. So you only need one or the other. Always remember that. So let's continue then to the vocabulary, or sorry, not vocabulary, the sentence practice. So I'm going to show you this sentence, and then you try to think what's the correct way to finish it, because we've just done all this grammar practice or grammar learning, so let's practice it. So number 1, I English every day. What do you think the answer is? If you said study, you're correct. So we've got a present simple. I study English every day. Let's look at the next one. Number 2, summer, usually hot. So what do you think that is? Do you say is? If you did, you are correct. Summer is usually hot. Now we've got a fact. We've got a habit for number 1, a fact for number 2. Another example, about grammar right now. Maybe a little trickier. Well, if you said are thinking, you're correct. We are thinking about grammar right now. And then, next one, David for an accounting company. What do you think it is? Is working. David is working for an accounting company. That's a mistake. That should say David works for an accounting company. Present simple. That's my mistake on the PowerPoint. Oops. So this is actually an interesting point we can talk about. So David works for an accounting company. That's the normal thing. It's a habit. It's a routine. He does this every day. But you can use the present continuous in a sentence like this. David is working for an accounting company right now. Maybe David changes his job very often. So you can say, David works, or David is working for an accounting company right now because he is on a special contract and he will probably change jobs again in the future. So if it kind of depends on your meaning which one is more correct in this example. If you're just talking about normal daily life, normal job, present simple, David works for an accounting company. But maybe you want to make that special meaning. Maybe you want to say, my friend is someone who changes jobs a lot, or he is freelance, so he gets a contract and then changes to another contract and changes to another contract. He works online. Then we can use the present continuous here. He's working for an accounting company now, but next week he has a different project, so he is going to work for a different company next week. So it's a mistake on my part, but it brings a good point to talk about. And then so finally, let's look at the final practice for this grammar. A cat right now. Negative, not have. What is it? Did you say don't have? If you did, then you were correct. I don't have a cat right now. Sadly, I don't. I want one very badly. My family has cats in the United States, and I miss them every day. But what happened? Why do we have don't? Where did this come from? So don't worry, I'll mention. So think about the subject auxiliary inversion. Let's go back to making questions. So as I said, English always wants to move an auxiliary verb to make the question. But it's the same idea for negative. When English makes a sentence negative, it wants to put no or not after an auxiliary verb. So in an example like we are thinking about grammar right now, number 3, I can make that sentence negative. We aren't thinking about grammar right now. We're thinking about lunch. We're hungry. We aren't thinking works because I have auxiliary verb are. I can put not, and then everything is okay. But in number 5, the positive, I have a cat right now. Uh-oh, no auxiliary. Main verb have, I have a cat. And I cannot say I not have a cat right now. That's incorrect. So English says, that do auxiliary, I can add that. Just like I can add it to a sentence to make a question, I can add it to the sentence to make the negative. I don't have a cat right now. So same idea. Present simple sentences for questions and for negative will use this auxiliary verb do. So don't forget it. Here's some more examples to work with. David doesn't work here. They don't eat lunch. In each of these positive examples, David works here. They eat lunch. We do not have an auxiliary because they're present simple. So to make the negative, we must change. David doesn't. We must add do. They don't add do. But in the present continuous, we don't need this. I'm not eating right now, auxiliary am. Eating, main verb, boop, not in the middle. They aren't partying tonight. So they are partying were good, boop, negative in the middle. So that's also the same idea for subject auxiliary inversion. We're going to carry it to negatives as well. So now vocabulary. Now let's talk vocabulary. Uh, so we're going to talk about food, as I said. So this one is just going to be some food verbs. I'll just give a presentation. These are the most common different verbs to describe different methods of cooking. So we have the verb boil or to boil. To cook covered in hot water. This is something that you usually do to pasta or vegetables. You put in a big pot and you boil with lots of water, very hot water. To fry, this is to cook in oil. And it's the same if you have a lot of oil or a little bit of oil in a pan. We still use verb fry. We can make a difference. You can say deep fry if you want to talk about something totally covered in oil, deep fried, or to shallow fry. That's when you just do it in the pan on top of the stove. Maybe you're frying some vegetables in a pan. So then next we have to roast. This is to cook in an oven at a very high temperature. Usually you roast meat, you roast potatoes, you roast vegetables. So that's the idea for roasting. Very high temperatures, maybe 200 degrees, 210, 220 degrees. And then we have bake. Same process, lower temperature. So we bake things at a lower temperature, usually cake and maybe cookies or desserts are things that you bake because they need less temperature, 175 degrees, 170, 160, the cooler end of the oven. Next we have grill. This is to cook over an open fire. This is something you do in the park or in your yard on a weekend in the summer, maybe with some steak or some vegetables. It's my favorite way to cook. And then we have to steam. This is to cook something with the hot water vapor, the gas that comes once you boil water. You've got the steam rising on the top, and then you can cook things in the steam. This is the healthy way to cook. And then we have saute. This is when you have your pan very, very hot, very little fat, very little oil, and then you're cooking very quickly. The food is jumping around. It comes from French, meaning to jump. So the food is jumping in the pan very quickly. You're sautéing it. So let's look at some examples. I roast potatoes once a week for dinner. My favorite food is sautéed green beans. David grills steaks in the summer. All of these present simple because we're just describing facts and things I do, habits every day for every week for dinner, or my favorite food, or what David does in the summer, all of these habits. So let's do pronunciation. I'm going to say each of the verbs. I want you to repeat after me. So boil, boil, fry, fry, roast, roast, bake, bake, grill, grill, steam, steam, saute, saute. All right, so it's time for a vocabulary game. Those were the verbs to use for cooking. Let's look at some different foods and objects in your kitchen. I'm going to show you a picture, and I want you to say as quickly as you can, what is the name? What's this thing? So I'll start with the first picture. What's that? Anyone remember? Oh, it's an eggplant. In American English, we're going to say eggplant. In British English, we're going to say aubergine. Your choice, whichever word you like better. I say eggplant. So, next picture. Ooh, what's that? What's that? Zucchini. Yeah, this one has the same difference. British English will say courgette. American English will say zucchini. Again, your choice, whichever you prefer. All right, next picture. What is it? Mm, green beans. Yeah, this one's the same across the world. Green beans. Very creative. It's a bean. It's green. Ooh, very creative. So, next. Anyone remember? Anyone remember? Crab. Yeah, if you said crab, very good. So this is a type of seafood. And then next photo. Mm, shrimp or prawn. American English uses shrimp kind of for all of these, big and small. British English does make a difference between shrimp and prawn. So prawn are the very big ones, very big ones, and shrimp are the smaller ones you might see in a salad. So again, if you want to use the British English, go for it, and you can say prawn. And then the final photo for the food. What's that? Somewhat strange. What is that? Well, it's chicken. And if you said chicken wings, congratulations, you got the bonus answer. So all of the meat from the bird is called chicken. Specifically, this part is the chicken wing. So let's do vocabulary for all, or vocabulary pronunciation for all of these. So I will say everything British and American, and you repeat after me. So eggplant, aubergine, zucchini, courgette, green beans, crab, shrimp, prawn, say this one again, prawn, and chicken wings. All right, so let's go to the next game. Same idea, same game, but now with instruments, utensils in the kitchen. So, what's that one? Anyone remember? It's a pan or a skillet. You can use either word in either country. Pan or skillet. All right. Whoa, ooh, what do you call that? Ah, a strainer or a sieve. Usually we say strainer if it's for cooking, like for pasta or for boiled vegetables, we'll say strainer. Or we'll call it a sieve if you're doing baking. Maybe you put flour in it and you need to hit it to make the flour fall through. We'll say sieve if it's for baking. Next photo. Ooh, ooh, pot. Yeah, that's just a pot. Any size, small, tall, fat, skinny, we'll say pot. Okay, now, next one. This one is a little different, so I'm going to show you one object, and then we're going to talk about smaller parts. So the whole thing, anyone know the name for the entire thing? Yeah, the whole thing we'll call is the stove. So if you say, oh, I forgot to turn the stove off, that could be any part. But now what do you call the little thing, the thing that makes the heat that you do the cooking on? Anyone know? This one's different by country. So it's called the eye in America, or in the United States, we'll say the eye of the stove. In British English, they'll say the hob. Your choice again, whichever you prefer, eye or hob. And then what do we call that part? The actual baking and roasting part? Yeah, that one's the oven. So the oven's very specific. It's the hot box of the stove. So the whole thing is a stove. The thing for frying and for sautéing and boiling is the eye, and then for roasting and baking is the oven. So let's do a bit of pronunciation for all of these. So repeat after me. Pan, skillet, strainer, strainer, sieve, sieve. Just don't say the E here, ignore it. Sieve, pot, eye, hob, oven, stove. Oh, very good. I'm sure these are all familiar words for you. Okay. Well, thank you all. So that's the end of my first lesson for this intermediate course. So I'm just going to show you a review. What's everything we talked about? It was a lot of information very quickly. So today we reviewed and compared the present simple to the present continuous. So the present simple were for hacks, habits, and things that happen often. The present continuous are for things happening right now. We've got to make the present simple. It's just subject and your base form of your verb. Very easy. I work, you eat, she jumps. Very simple. However, for the present continuous, we add auxiliary verb to be. So subject, be, verb, ing. I am teaching, I am sitting, I am walking. We'll add the extra part of the verb. Do remember in the present simple, it's going to have an S when it's he, she, it. So he walks, she jumps, I, or it eats. Maybe talking about a dog or a cat, it eats. Always, always, always try to create the habit to say that. And then for the present continuous, remember we've got contractions. Lots and lots of contractions. I'm, your, he's, she's, it's, we're, there, and the negative aren't and isn't. So do remember those. In addition to those verbs, we talked about subject auxiliary inversion, or how to make questions. And then we did some fun activities with food vocabulary. So, wow, you've learned a lot in today's lesson. Uh, so, thank you so much for coming and for watching my broadcast today. Uh, so please, if you have any questions, now is the time to ask. Please feel free to type in the chat any thoughts or questions you might have, and I'll try to answer them as best as I can. So anything about the verb tenses, anything about subject auxiliary inversion, any other confusion, maybe about those food words or how to use them or when to use them. So please take the time now, ask those questions. I'll try to answer them as best I can and try to resolve any confusion because we went very fast, lots of information, so I understand if you have any questions. But so that's everything. Thank you so much, as I said, for coming to the broadcast today. Please come back tomorrow to see the next lesson with me. I'll be here, and we'll be moving on to some new grammar, some new vocabulary and pronunciation to study. So once again, thank you so much. It was great to be here, great to see you all, and I hope to see you again very shortly. So bye-bye.